So, today we will be talking about elements, atoms, and atomic structure. The first thing we're going to talk about is an element. So, what is an element? Well, elements are the pure substances that are the simplest form of matter. That just means that if it is an element, it is as simple of a substance as it can get. You cannot break it down into any simpler substance. All matter in the entire universe is made up of one or more elements. So some matter is made of a single element, like a piece of gold, and other matter is made up of many, many different elements. Some examples of elements that you've probably heard of: oxygen, nitrogen, gold, neon, carbon, hydrogen, helium, silver, iron, neon. I could go on and on. But again, elements are the simplest substance. They cannot be broken down into any more simple substance, and they are the substances that make up all matter in our universe. So all of the known elements, all of the elements that exist in our universe can be found on the periodic table. You guys have probably seen these in your hanging up in your science classroom. I know I have one in mine. And by the end of this unit, you will know how to read it. You'll know how to do calculations based on the information that it gives you. But for now, all you need to know is that all of the elements that are known in our universe can be found on this table. So that means that all of the matter in our universe is made up of one or more of the substances listed on this table. Inside of the table, they are organized in a very specific fashion based on their properties. But again, we will get into more detail of that as we go through the unit. Next, we're going to talk about atoms. So what are atoms? Again, something that you've probably heard of or seen. So atoms are simply the smallest units of matter. So all of the elements that we just discussed come in these very, 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 very tiny little units called atoms. So you can think of them as the building blocks. So all elements, and therefore all matter, is made up of these tiny little units called atoms. They're the smallest unit you can break an element down into and still maintain its properties. So if you think of building up a tower made of Legos, that could be my element. And if I break it down into every single Lego, those are my atoms. They are the building blocks that make up matter. Therefore, we know that all matter is made up of atoms, of one or more element. If we look over here, we see a very common model that is used to represent atoms. So we're about to jump in and look at what that represents. And down here, we can see an example of a couple different types of atoms, hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms to be specific, coming together to create what you will now know is water. So atomic structure. So inside of these tiny, 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 tiny little units that make up all matter are a couple of regions that you need to be familiar with. So every single atom has these two areas that you should be familiar with. First being the nucleus. So the nucleus right here in the very center of the atom. Here is where you find all of the mass of the atom. The second important area is the outer orbitals. The outer orbitals are found on the very, 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 very outer region or the outer circle of the atom. Now we're going to jump into what are these little particles that are located in these two regions. So inside of every atom, you have your two regions. And inside of those regions, we find three different types of particles that make up all atoms. We call these subatomic particles. Sub meaning under, atomic referencing atoms. So these are even smaller particles that make up all atoms. The first is a neutron. So a neutron, which is represented here by the green circle, is a neutral particle. Neutral simply meaning that it does not have a charge or its charge is zero. You find neutrons located inside of the nucleus of the atom, and they do have a mass that contributes to the overall mass of the atom. Second particle we're going to talk about is protons. P for proton, P for positively is a nice way to remember that your protons are your positively charged particles. So meaning they, represented by the red, have a charge of +1. They also are located, as you can see here in the diagram, inside the nucleus of the atom. And like the neutrons, they also have a mass that contributes to the overall mass of the atom. The third and final, most interesting of the three subatomic particles, later in the unit you'll see why, are our electrons. Electrons, here represented in yellow, are negatively charged, meaning they have a charge of -1. These are located in the outer orbitals, and I can't show you this in a drawing, but what electrons do is they constantly, at very, very high rates of speed, rotate or orbit around those outer orbitals. Now, the most important takeaway from this slide is that you need to know. Now, electrons, so they exist. We know from our first unit that anything that's a physical substance has mass and takes up space. However, electrons' mass is so small, even compared to how tiny an atom is, that we consider them to have no mass. We call this negligible mass, meaning that it is so tiny that we don't even take it into consideration when calculating the mass of the atom. So we consider the electrons to have no mass, meaning that when we calculate the mass of an atom, we do not take the electrons into consideration. The last thing we're going to look at here is a graphic organizer that I think is very helpful for you in memorizing and practicing learning the properties of your three subatomic particles. I would highly recommend that you reproduce something similar to this inside of your science notebook. We can see here all three of our subatomic particles, and there are three things that you really need to become very familiar with about each: their charge, their location inside of the atom, and whether or not they have a mass that contributes to the overall mass of the atom. And as we see what we just discussed, the electron, a negative charge or charge of -1, located in the outer orbitals and does not have a mass that contributes to the overall mass of the atom. Proton, being a positively charged particle located inside of the nucleus that does have a mass which contributes to the overall mass of the atom. And the neutron, being neutrally charged or having a charge of 0, located inside the nucleus with a mass that does contribute to the overall mass of the atom.